Hello again. This is Talking Pictures. Michael Dow is back talking to me, Mary Stack, about the movies that we've caught in the last couple of weeks. We're going to share our thoughts with you. And we're starting off today with Isle of Dogs. So, quirky Wes Anderson.
Quirky Wes Anderson, a little bit on the regressive side for me, I think at least relative to his past two films. I was kind of slow to buying into the whole Wes Anderson thing. But when I saw Moonrise Kingdom, I found it like authentically moving as well as quirky. So it has a kind of goofiness to it, but with a heart. And then Grand Budapest Hotel I thought was phenomenal. I mean, he was channeling Stefan Zweig there, so there was a kind of source material that I think provided that film substance. This one I felt was far more regressive for him. I don't think he's really making progress as an auteur.
Okay, well maybe we should tell people what it's about.
Yeah.
Okay.
I can't wait to complain.
So it's a group of anthropomorphized animals. They're on a Japanese island where they are interned by a Japanese dictatorial mayor.
And a dog hater.
Yeah, and a dog hater, that's right. Apparently modelled after Toshiro Mifune. So there's this great cast of voices. They're playing this gang of canines that are on the prowl, and they're kind of rabid on this island. And there's this huge political undertone in this movie which lurks beneath. I found it disappointing because there was too many detours in the plot. There was also some inexplicable things for me. All the characters speak English, all the dogs speak English, but all the characters, the humans, speak Japanese with no subtitles. So it kind of made me think of Lord of the Flies for some reason. Anarchy, political subterfuge, control, leadership, and then we've got these robotized dogs, attack dogs. So we got the whole AI thing going on there. So there was a little too much in the mix for me.
Yeah, I think that speaks already to the complications of the plot. And again, one of the issues with the film, I mean, first of all, it's coming under criticism for being a little bit too culturally insensitive, or that there's a certain amount of cultural appropriation in terms of kind of Japanese traditions and things. My problem there isn't so much that I necessarily found it insensitive, but it seemed as if there was a disparity in terms of the formalism that Wes Anderson brings to it, which is immaculate. I mean, first of all, we should mention to it stop motion. And it's beautiful stop motion. And I'm a big fan of stop motion. I love the way in which you can, as you're watching the films, you can like see the mechanics of the animation. So there's a kind of self-consciousness to that, which I really enjoy. So again, the formalism, the style is exquisite, and again, all of the patented motifs in Wes Anderson's films, the centralized perspective, kind of emphasis on flatness, all of that stuff is still there. So his signature style is nicely translated into the animation. Where it gets bogged down, I think, is what you're pointing out, is there's a kind of, the plot is overly contrived, it's overly complicated, and at the same time it feels half-baked. There's some kind of weird political revolutionary allegory to it, but it just doesn't seem to be fleshed out.
And it's very odd, the person that wins the day. I thought the dogs would liberate themselves for some reason, that there wouldn't be this non-Japanese Angela Davis-looking heroine who comes to the rescue.
Exactly, and that's, I think, where a big part of the complaint is coming from with the film, is that there's the white savior complex. Greta Gerwig, not a big fan, but Greta Gerwig plays this kind of American Midwestern girl who is the great interventionist, and she brings about revolution and liberates the dogs. This isn't giving away too much, but really, because the plot is kind of, as I say, it's not nearly as important as the form. But I think there's a problematic there, because there's this extended segment late in Act 2 of the film where it seems as if all the Japanese characters are kind of giving in to the authoritarian rule of their new ruler, and I don't know, it just doesn't seem to really work, and it doesn't speak well to the people who are being oppressed, or the dogs, whatever, to kind of fend for themselves and to, in effect, liberate themselves. Now, another issue that I had with the film as well, and it's the Bryan Cranston character, Chief, right, the main dog, who is portrayed, again, in Act 1 of the film as a big nonconformist, but he goes through a process of conformity, which
But for love, wasn't it slightly...
Yeah, well, it's for love of one's master, right?
Yeah,
as well as love for a character,
horrible character.
Nutmeg, character played by Scarlett Johansson, and she's just there as a love object.
Yeah, and it's like Lady in the Tramp almost.
Yeah, so there are all these kind of like little details that you're constantly trying to keep track of, and it loses its own thread. And as I say, the the whole message of conformity with the main character struck me as inauthentic, especially for a Wes Anderson character, because what I've appreciated about his work is that his characters are very often nonconformists, even if they are living in an oppressed situation, whether it's the family in Moonrise Kingdom or the politics of Grand Budapest Hotel. Whereas this one seemed to, in some weird way, kind of celebrate the characters kind of giving in to the conformity of his role, right? Again, becoming the kind of dog to the master kind of thing at the end, which it's bothersome.
Yeah, he got a bit introspective to the point of losing us,
Right.
I think. But I did
Yeah.
think it had some quirky, artistic,
It's
technical
gorgeous.
things
It's gorgeous.
are fun.
And here's
And in music. There's some great humour, like, I don't want to be an underdog. This is a
totally.
wonderful
Well,
script
the
sometimes.
the asides, the script is very sharp and very clever. And what I especially like too is that it maintains a certain tradition of sight gags that you find in animation, that things that only animation can do, which I love. But at the same time, it suffers from, I think, the complex that a lot of contemporary animated films do suffer from, is that the form and the style is so advanced, and you're focusing on it so much that the plot is like running
to keep
desperately,
up. Yeah,
trying
yeah.
to keep up or keep pace.
And it was a bit long. It was
Yeah.
a bit too long for me. I found myself bored.
It was, even though it's short, it's still too long.
Yeah.
And again, the kind of contrivances, the kind of fussiness of the plot isn't terribly zen. Okay, again, the form of the film is very zen, but the story is too fussy. It's too detailed. It's too busy with itself.
So,
you know.
okay.
Yeah, it's reasonable. Definitely see it if you want to see it for aesthetic purposes, but the plot, again, just as I
Yeah.
say, it's
Fair.
he's better than that.
Fair to middling. All right, so, okay, so this brings us to our second movie, which is actually an Italian production. Paolo Virzi, or Virzi, has made this film called The Leisure Seeker. And it's the name of an old, beloved Winnebago that this couple, this ailing, aged couple, Helen Mirren and Donald Sutherland, decide to cross-country in. They kind of run away against their family's will and knowledge, actually, at the beginning, and just pursue, it's a kind of a pilgrimage to the Ernest Hemingway house in Florida, in the Keys. So that's the kind of basic concept.
And the important detail, of course, is that Donald Sutherland's character, John, is suffering from memory loss. And I don't believe his condition is actually specifically diagnosed in the film. We just know that he's suffering from some form of memory
so
loss.
there's dementia or Alzheimer's or something.
Right, and Helen Mirren's character,
Appears
Ella,
to have cancer or something.
right, well, we don't learn that.
We don't know that either, but
Yeah.
she's popping pills every 5 minutes with whiskey.
Yeah, so something's up. Something's definitely, but she's in effect the caretaker for her ailing husband. Yeah.
So this delivered an enormous punch to me, and I wasn't expecting it. I think because the landscape wasn't just the road trip, it was this whole love at 50. This couple's been together for a very long time, but also the whole memory issue was fascinating to me. You know, real memory, imagined memory, and then demented memory when you've got this stuff coming from left field.
Right.
So I thought this was a fantastic exploration of that territory in the confines of this Winnebago, which seemed to have everything you could ever need inside.
They seem much more comfortable living out of that than they seem to what few impressions we have of their life at home and with the family. Yeah, I mean, the funny thing with me was that the film, for all its flaws, and there are plenty of flaws, and I think the flaws are kind of obvious pretty much from the outset. So, I mean, there are issues with the script. There are some lines that are kind of put in the mouths of these extraordinary actors which just kind of make you choke a little, you know. Helen Mirren's character describes the Winnebago as the old rust bucket, and they're having a whale of a time on their road trip. There's a lot.
It's a bit corny.
Yeah,
that
very
southern
cornball.
corny thing.
Very
Yeah.
cornball, and Helen Mirren seems to be struggling with her accent, and Donald Sutherland seems to think that his role is below him sometimes. Like it's like, you know, this is Donald Sutherland kind of playing this kind of, you know, like Oscar bait role. You know, so there's
I
certain
didn't get that.
yeah, I did a little bit. Well, you know, so there are kind of limitations to the film that it wears on its sleeve, and you know, just kind of take those with a grain of salt, because I think its positives far outweigh the negatives. A couple of things being that I think, as you're alluding to, that it really puts you through, as a viewer, puts you through the experience of having to care for someone who is in that perpetual state of, I don't want to say mindlessness, but you know, just everything being extremely short term, combined with the fact, you know, it's, you know, what was real, what was a memory, what was fabricated. So she's really dealing with a lot, and the film spends a great deal of time, I think, putting the audience rather effectively in her situation and understanding what that's like. Now, if you enjoy that kind of realism, then, you know, it's an interesting experience. And the other thing that I really liked about it, and the thing I liked more than anything probably, and whatever limitations the film had, is that it's, first of all, it's a road movie. And I'm a sucker for road movies, no matter how terrible they are. But believe me, this is not Easy Rider. This is not Little Miss Sunshine.
It's a trip with a twist.
Yeah, you know. But the thing about the road, you know, it's the great American genre. I think the road movie. Yeah. And what I really liked about it is that there's a certain kind of inevitable fatalism to their journey, and you can kind of predict what's going to happen, but the extent to which it is realized at the end of the film, I think, is absolutely amazing. And we just put it this way, the movie goes where it needs to go, and it goes as far as it needs to go. And so it's the kind of ending that I feel the film earns. You know, I don't know how you felt about the ending, but I felt it was perfectly appropriate, and it's not a cop-out.
No, it's not. And there was two things that I liked. One was exactly what you're saying, which is, how does one die with dignity, and how do you pull that off against all the social norms?
What right do you have to that?
Yes, how far can you go to actually have the last few days in the manner in which you were, you know, against the family's approval?
Exactly.
And are they slightly wacky and dangerous? Yeah, they are. There's a bit of Bonnie and Clyde to it.
But they're also sacrificial for one another. They you know,
devoted.
Totally devoted, and you really get that sense. But and there was another point too that you, I think, were alluding to in terms of memory. And it seems to me the most interesting conflict that the film raises is the differential between actual lived experience and the preservation of that experience, because there's so many scenes in the film where they're watching slides of their family and birthdays and marriages and things. And again, that can be corny, but you know, the film kind of sets up that conflict between, you know, what is really more important, experience and the memory of that experience, or knowledge? Because the film also dedicates a lot of time to the fact that Donald Sutherland's character is an academic and he worships Hemingway.
Constantly quoting him.
Yeah, and the only times in the film where he seems focused, let alone really alive, is when he's talking about Hemingway. And so the film establishes, I think, rather effectively that dilemma. You know, it's like, what's more important, life itself or the life of the mind? And that's what I really appreciated. You know, and
I agree, and losing a person too, watching someone slip away in front of your eyes.
Exactly,
that process,
and knowing that that is the one thing that matters to that person, the mind.
Right. And I thought that was marvelous, and also an interesting reversal, because Donald Sutherland played in another movie which I loved, where he was the opposite. He was the person watching that process with Julie Christie in She's Gone Away, or something like that. It was a Canadian film, very good. So it was interesting to see the flip side of that coin, with Donald Sutherland descending into this place. And it frightens him. There's parts where he's terrified.
Because he's aware that he's not aware. And that's what's so...
he's terrified. And I think that fear of what's happening, and also when he goes off unaccompanied. I mean, they are totally, in the most intricate, intimate way, codependent.
Yeah, well, that's the other problem too. It's like they hit the road for the freedom of it, and yet they're constantly constrained by their own limitations. It's interesting. I mean, I think if there's one major critique of the film, is that it seems to surrender a little bit too easily to the kind of disillusionment of like 60s revolutionism and the Trump
thing
metaphor of the road.
Odd. That was very odd.
Him
joining a Trump demonstration.
They kind of they incorporate certain allusions to Trump's rise in 2016, and but it seems, I mean, that struck me a little bit as shallow and a little bit too easy. It didn't really deal with a kind of resignation to the kind of utopian ideals of the 60s that it seems to want to. You know, it seems to think as though it's going...
Maybe it's because it was an Italian production.
Yeah, possibly. Yeah, again. But again, it takes more than just incorporating a Janis Joplin or Carole King song, to kind of get your point across. It's got to go a little further than that. But as I say, as far as a character study, and as far as kind of following through on the kind of metaphor of the road and the way the film ends, it compensated for everything else for me.
Me too. I definitely commend you to, even though the critics went after this with hatchets.
Yeah, I think we're thinking that the critics were wrong about all the films we're talking about today. That seems to be just being contrarians today.
True.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're moving along to two movies now that we individually saw, and I didn't see Mike's film, he didn't see my film, so I couldn't go to see A Quiet Place because I knew I probably wouldn't be able to sleep for the next 6 months if I went to see it, so I didn't see it. But Mike did.
I did.
So over to you, Michael.
Okay, so plot summation, which is probably my weakest talent. But it's set in the immediate future, around about 2020 or 2021. And it focuses exclusively on a family who are living in what appears to be some kind of, at least borderline apocalyptic scenario where these monsters who live in the woods, who have extremely sensitive hearing, prey on humanity. Yeah. And so this family basically has to spend the entirety of the narrative being as quiet as possible. Now, that's the gimmick, and unfortunately, it's a gimmick. And that's one of the problems I have with the film. I had a lot of problems with it. I mean, first of all, I'm kind of a horror fanatic, so I'm like, I'll pick apart every little detail and, judge it as to whether or not it's true to the genre or whether it strays from the genre, whether it understands the genre or not. One of the things that bothered me right from the beginning, and I didn't know this before going in, is that it's a Michael Bay co-production. And I got the feeling that it has Michael Bay's fingerprints all over it, that it will often trades nuance and subtlety for spectacle and sensationalism, and the characters aren't nearly as fleshed out as I think they need to be. So there are there's kind of a couple of significant issues with the film right out of the gate. A couple of the things that I think the film has going against it is that because of this gimmick, because of this emphasis on the characters needing to be silent, how do you then communicate effectively information to an audience? And so the film will do this really ham-fisted thing, like it'll show newspaper headlines all over the place, detailing, the backstory of the situation that these characters find themselves in. So there's an obviousness to the way the film kind of deals with the kind of sensory deprivation dynamic of these characters not being able to talk. So it compensates by using the written word throughout the film. It compensates often with the characters using sign language with subtitles. It seems as if, on the one hand, the film wants to be experimental and wants to have this exercise, as I say, in a kind of sensory deprivation, both on behalf of the characters as well as the audience, because we're paying hyper attention, to how characters are communicating given, their limitations. But again, it's not subtle enough, it's not clever enough, and it's not really thought through enough. It seems to me overly condescending in terms of its overly explanatory exposition to the audience. Okay, so there's some kind of basic, I think, concern there.
Can I just ask a quick question?
Yeah, of course.
How did the audience manage with the utter quietness?
The audience I saw it with, there were 3 people, unfortunately, immediately behind me who would not shut up for 1 second. They had to talk through it because it made them.
Goodness.
No, seriously. And I wonder. I mean, again, not to critique a mass audience, as it were, to kind of think of this as this nebulous blob of people who would just go to movies and not really think through what they're watching. But I could tell that the people behind me had a hard time kind of processing. It's like it made them nervous and made them anxious. So again, the kind of quietness of the film, from the feedback I've gotten from most people and my own experience with the audience I saw it with, is very effective. But as I say, I found it to be very, gimmicky. It's kind of this high concept thing. It's like, new take on the old horror film where we're going to deprive you of sound. I don't want to rant too much about this because the sound effects are overly sensationalized. There are all kinds of jump scares in the film to compensate for the quietness. As I say, it's got a kind of Michael Bay adolescence to it. Okay.
So wasn't the main actor also the director?
Yeah, John Krasinski directed.
Right.
And as I say, I almost get a sense of tension there as well because I think Krasinski is likewise going for nuance, but he has someone like a Michael Bay to appease, and therefore he's going for, again, the shock effects. So there are a couple of things that I just generally despise in most so-called horror movies are the jump scares. The hand coming out of nowhere, the monster appearing out of nowhere with some kind of extremely unnecessarily loud sound effect accompanying it, right? Another thing that's interesting about the film is that it dresses itself up in the kind of gimmickry of this novel approach to horror narrative. But it is as old school and as creaky and as traditional as any monster movie. So people should really understand that while it tries to be novel and new, it's very conservative, it's a very traditional film. It focuses very much on the nucleus of the family. So you get into these spots where the film is very sentimental, okay? And the tones of the film are very monochromatic. So you'll have these moments of sentimentality between father and daughter, or you'll have moments of solemnity where the family is, very humorless in their kind of quiet moments of worrying whether or not the monster is right outside the door. It's very, again, like Isle of Dogs, it feels kind of regressive.
It sounds very self-conscious.
It's very self-conscious and very self-aware as well. But again, the biggest selling point for me are in fact the kids. There are two children in the film. What's the name? One of the kids, sorry, I don't remember his name. The one who plays the boy is really good, but the girl, Millicent Simmons, who was deaf since infancy, the actress herself was deaf, and she's extraordinary because she is the one character I think who brings the film a certain kind of gravitas. And when she's in a state of anxiety and terror and trying to hide from the monster, those moments, strictly due to her performance, are extraordinarily convincing. Where it feels as if all the other characters, but certainly the adults, are much more superficial, stereotypical. They really don't get beyond archetype in the film. There's really no depth. I don't really even get the sense that the family knows each other all that well. And there's this contrivance in the middle of the film where everyone is separated and terrorized individually by the monsters. It's just, again, like Isle of Dogs, there's a lot to it that I feel is just kind of half-baked and not thought through as diligently as it needs to be. So another thumbs down. So my question for you would be, just quickly, what is it about horror that bothers you or keeps you out of the theater?
I do not like being scared. I think life is scary enough.
Okay.
Really and truly.
Okay.
I don't need any additional
See, I go to horror for the catharsis. Like life for me is one big failure of a catharsis. And horror movies allow me that.
Well, that's another whole episode on its own. Okay, so last film of the day, Chappaquiddick. And unlike Michael's disappointment with A Quiet Place, Chappaquiddick was a very pleasant surprise for me. I went in expecting the worst, and it, again, had been completely savaged by the critics because it didn't answer the questions. I think everybody went expecting there to be this great, uncovering of the facts. And it really wasn't, that wasn't the purpose of the film, unless that's a cop-out to say that. I wasn't expecting to discover some great truth about what really went on that particular July night in 1969, but I did discover a lot about, again, the milieu of the time and the power of the handful of people in government to secure the press, to inveigle judges, police chiefs, whoever they needed with a phone call to get what they wanted done. And Joe Kennedy was a sinister character. He comes over as a very unlikable, nasty, unlovable man who actually has a stroke throughout the whole film. So he can only utter the odd word, but they're horrible things when he does say them. And unfortunately, Edward Kennedy is the butt of all his hatred. He's like the whipping boy of the family, and it comes over very clearly. He was the least liked of the sons. And there's this horrible scene at the end where he goes up to his father, and his father smacks him across the face and says, "You will never be great." And he backs up and says, "Well, all the other boys were great, all your other sons were great, but they were great in their own way, not because of you." And he hugs his father after this terrible assault. It's like the Pontius Pilate thing. It's just, I will wash my hands of you. So he's a tortured man. And I think Jason Clarke, who's an Australian, who I thought was deserving of an Oscar in this performance, shows this very tortured soul who tries to do the right thing. And his father's saying, use an alibi, use an alibi. And he actually, at the end, almost tells the truth. Almost tells the truth. It's kind of a doctored form of the truth. But there's a couple of other very good performances. Mary Jo Kopechne is played by Kate Mara. She's very good. And this other, the lawyer who tries to get him to do the right thing, Ed Helms, plays Joe Gargan. He's another very brilliant performance in the whole. And Jim Gaffigan's in it as well, playing a straight man.
So Ed Helms as well, they're playing someone against type or against
Yes,
public
against
image.
Yes, yeah. It's very well done. I like the way it was shot. It's not extravagant, it's sufficient, and it's authentic. There's an authenticity to it. But the big coup for me was seeing how they were able to manipulate this whole incident very, very carefully around the moon landing, which happens to be going on the very same weekend that the Chappaquiddick incident occurs. So they're able to deflect all the public attention with the aid of the New York Times away from Joe Kennedy. Sorry, not Joe Kennedy, Ed Kennedy. So I felt that this plummeting the depths, no pun intended, didn't unearth anything more about the incident. But in terms of that awful territory of the father-son disconnect, anger, unfulfilled expectation, that terrible weight that Ted Kennedy bore his whole life of never being good enough in any respect, just is so touching.
And he had that whole image post Chappaquiddick of redemption.
Yes,
almost this mythic redemption, an attempt at it. Yeah. So
it was very, very. I actually have a life cover I picked up in a garage sale years ago of that morning. It's the life cover of Ed Kennedy the morning after Chappaquiddick. The photograph of him in the black and white, and that image is very true to the film. They capture the lost man who's desperate to do the right thing, and I just think Jason Clarke was amazing and convincing in that.
With a film like this, I see the trailer for some movie like this, and I'm like, never in a million years would I go to see this, because to me, it strikes me a little bit too much like history porn. It's like everybody wants the money shot of the car going in, and how are they going to stage it, and da-da. That's what I worry about. But if it's a film that is in fact a lot more thoughtful than how it's being marketed, then that's probably more a fault of, kind of, again, faulty representation of what the movie really is. If it gets into the inner workings, then there's a certain value on the face of that.
It gets into the inner workings and, the limits of power, responsibility, the whole morality, the treading the line between what's right, that comes up a lot. I'm trying to do what's right for me, despite he's got all the pressures of his father's cronies, and Joe Kennedy says, if you don't do this right, you're not going to be back in the family. Basically you cut off. Yeah. So there's terrible kind of weight on him all the time of punishment. And he says, I've never been allowed to be myself. He actually says that to his father. He says, I'm just trying to find out who I am. Right. And it's touching. It's sad that you can live your whole life trying to be what somebody else didn't become. That's basically Joe Kennedy. He wanted to be all the things his kids.
Well, it's almost like, it's like the agony of influence. Having to grow up in the shadow of two men who were, in and of themselves, I'm sure, just as flawed as Teddy was. A lot. Yeah, but the way in which they were able to masquerade or camouflage the flaws of the older Kennedy brothers versus with Teddy, combined with the late 60s and things falling apart. It's like that machine is beginning to break down.
It is.
And if the film captures that, the kind of essence of that in the moment, then I might almost actually go and see it.
So I would say be prepared to be nicely surprised by this film. It's about bigger truths than just what went down that night.
I'm Michael Down. This is Mary Stack. You've been watching Talking Pictures, and we will see you next time.
Bye.